Welcome back, guys, to Mr. Cursed. In today's episode, I'm sharing 5 scary true stories from the Appalachian Mountains. These are the creepy stories that locals are afraid to tell, stories so dark that even people who live there don't like talking about them. But before we start, please think about subscribing if you haven't already. Don't forget to like the video and share it with your friends and family. I'd also love to hear where you're watching from in the comments. Your support really means a lot to me. Now let's get started with these cursed mountain stories. I'm 35 now, work maintenance at a warehouse outside Nashville, and I don't talk about my family much anymore. Back when I was 28, I thought I had everything figured out. I'd been dating Sarah Chen for 2 years, had steady work, and was planning to propose. Sarah was perfect. Smart, funny, worked as a nurse at Vanderbilt. She deserved to meet my family before I popped the question, you know? That's what normal people do. Problem was, my family wasn't exactly normal, and I guess I'd been away from the mountains long enough to forget just how different they were from everyone else. The Williams family has been in the same Tennessee hollow for over a century, about 20 miles from the nearest town. Growing up there, I thought every family lived like we did, completely self-sufficient, suspicious of outsiders, keeping to ourselves. It wasn't until I left for vocational school that I realized most people don't live in compounds with 15 families, all sharing the same last name. When I told Sarah we were going to visit my relatives for a long weekend, I made it sound like a normal family reunion. I should have prepared her better, but honestly, I'd convinced myself they weren't that strange. The drive up the mountain took 3 hours from Nashville, the last hour on gravel roads that barely fit my Honda. Sarah kept checking her phone, watching the signal bars disappear. "How do they get internet up here?" she asked. I told her they didn't need it much. The Williams clan had always been suspicious of technology, preferring to handle things the old way. When we finally pulled up to the main house, I could see her trying to process what she was looking at. It wasn't one house, really, more like 6 or 7 cabins connected by covered walkways and additions that had been built over the decades. Smoke was coming from multiple chimneys, and I could hear voices calling out as our car crunched to a stop on the gravel. Before we'd even gotten our bags out, we were surrounded by aunts, uncles, and cousins I hadn't seen in years. Everyone wanted to hug me, shake Sarah's hand, welcome her to the family. Uncle Ezra, the unofficial patriarch since my grandfather passed, stepped forward with that big smile of his. "Jake, look at you, boy. And this must be Sarah." He took her hand in both of his and held it a little too long, studying her face. "Beautiful girl, good strong hands. You picked well, Jake." The way he said it made me uncomfortable, like he was evaluating livestock. But Sarah smiled politely. That's the thing about Sarah. She always tried to see the best in people. The family had prepared a feast. The long tables in the main house were loaded with fried chicken, green beans, cornbread, honey ham, and enough food to feed 30 people, which was good because there were 30 people, cousins, second cousins, great aunts, all sharing stories and catching up. Sarah sat between my cousin Mary and Aunt Ruth, answering questions about her work, her family, her background. I noticed the questions were getting more personal as the evening went on. "So your parents, they're from China?" Aunt Ruth asked. "Taiwan originally, but they've been in the States for 40 years, Sarah explained. "Any health problems in your family? Heart disease, diabetes, anything like that?" This was from my cousin Tommy, who I remembered being shy as a kid. Now he was staring at Sarah with an intensity that made me shift in my chair. "No, we've been pretty lucky health-wise," Sarah said, glancing at me with a look that said, "Why are they asking this?" Uncle Ezra cleared his throat. "That's good to hear. The Williams family has always been blessed with strong blood. We've kept our line pure for generations, and it shows. Look around this table, not a sick person's in among us." It was true in a way. Everyone looked healthy enough, though I was starting to notice things I'd forgotten from childhood. My cousin Dale's arms were a little too long for his body. Aunt Martha's head seemed too large for her frame. Little things, nothing you'd notice unless you were looking. But Sarah was looking. I could see her taking mental notes. After dinner, Uncle Ezra pulled me aside while the women were cleaning up. "She's a fine girl, Jake. Foreign blood, but that might not be a bad thing. We've been keeping to ourselves, maybe a little too much, if you know what I mean." He glanced toward the kitchen where Sarah was helping wash dishes. "The important thing is she's healthy and young, good breeding hips on her." "Uncle Ezra, that's—" I started to protest, but he held up a hand. "Now don't get all city on me, boy. These things matter. Your daddy and I talked about this before he passed. The Williams line needs to continue, and it needs to stay strong. You bring her into this family, you better be ready to do your duty." I didn't like the way he said duty, but before I could ask what he meant, Sarah appeared at my elbow. "Jake, I'm getting pretty tired. Is there somewhere we can put our bags?" They'd set us up in one of the smaller cabins about 100 yards from the main house. It had 2 bedrooms, which I appreciated. I'd been worried they'd assume we were sleeping together. As we walked across the compound in the darkness, Sarah was quiet. Too quiet. "They're intense," she finally said as we reached the cabin. "They're mountain people. They've been isolated up here for generations. Takes some getting used to." "Jake, why were they asking about my medical history? And what was that comment about breeding hips?" I winced. "Uncle Ezra's old-fashioned. He doesn't mean anything by it." But even as I said it, I wasn't sure that was true. Something felt different about the family since I'd been away. Or maybe I was different, and I was seeing them clearly for the first time. The next morning, I woke up to find Sarah wasn't in her bed. I found her outside, sitting on the porch steps, staring at the mountains. She looked pale. "You okay?" "Jake, there's something wrong with the coffee they gave me. It tastes medicinal, and I feel weird. Dizzy." Before I could respond, Aunt Martha appeared around the corner of the cabin. "Morning, you two. Sarah, honey, you need to come with me. The women want to have a little chat with you while the men are out working." "Actually, I was hoping Sarah and I could take a walk this morning," I said. "Show her around the property." Aunt Martha's smile didn't waver. "Oh, there'll be plenty of time for that later. Come on, Sarah. We've got things to discuss." Sarah looked at me uncertainly. But what could I say? These were my family members. I watched them walk toward the main house, Aunt Martha's arm linked through Sarah's like they were old friends. Something was bothering me, though I couldn't put my finger on what. I found the men gathered around Uncle Ezra's truck, cleaning rifles. "We're not really working, are we?" I asked. "Course not," laughed Cousin Tommy. "Just making sure everything's clean and ready." He looked at me sideways. "Your girl's getting the full family treatment right about now." "What do you mean?" Uncle Ezra set down his rifle. "Jake, you've been away from home too long. You've forgotten how things work up here. When a Williams man brings a woman to the family, she gets evaluated. Has to make sure she's suitable for breeding." The word hit me like a slap. "Breeding? What are you talking about? Don't play dumb, boy. You brought her here because you want to marry her, right? Well, marriage in this family means children, and children mean the continuation of the Williams bloodline. We can't just let anybody into the gene pool." I stared at him. "Gene pool? Uncle Ezra, what the hell has gotten into you?" "Nothing's gotten into me. This is how we've always done things. Your daddy went through the same process with your mama, his daddy before him. It's why the Williams family is so strong, so healthy. We breed carefully." The other men were nodding along like this was the most natural thing in the world. I looked around at their faces I'd known since childhood, and realized I was seeing them differently. Really seeing them. Dale's elongated limbs, Tommy's slightly too large skull, Cousin Pete's fingers that seemed to have too many joints. "I need to find Sarah," I said. "She's fine, Jake. The women are just taking some measurements, asking some questions. Standard procedure." I started walking toward the main house, but Uncle Ezra's voice stopped me. "Jake, you need to understand something. Your girlfriend has been accepted into this family. That means she's family now, and family doesn't leave." The way he said it made my blood run cold. I turned back to look at him. "What do you mean, doesn't leave?" "I mean she's staying. You both are. At least until she fulfills her obligations." "What obligations?" "Children, boy. Strong, healthy Williams children. That's what family is for." I ran toward the main house, my heart pounding. I could hear the men behind me, but they weren't chasing. They didn't need to. Where was I going to go? We were 20 miles from the nearest town, and they had my car keys. I found Sarah in the kitchen, surrounded by the women of the family. She was sitting in a chair while Aunt Martha examined her teeth like she was buying a horse. Sarah's eyes were wide and glassy. Whatever they'd put in her coffee was still affecting her. "What the hell are you doing to her?" I demanded. "Jake?" Aunt Ruth looked surprised. "We're just getting to know Sarah better, making sure she's healthy, you know. Strong genes are important." "Strong genes for what?" "For the babies, of course," said my cousin Mary, like I was being deliberately dense. "Sarah's going to give us beautiful children. Look at her bone structure. And her medical history is clean. No genetic defects, eyes. And her family line." Sarah tried to stand up, but Aunt Martha pushed her gently back into the chair. "Jake?" Sarah's voice was slurred. "Something's wrong. They keep talking about breeding schedules and genetic compatibility, and they won't let me leave." "Of course you can't leave, honey," Aunt Martha said sweetly. "You're family now, and we have work to do." That's when I noticed the charts on the kitchen table. Hand-drawn family trees going back 6 generations. But these weren't normal family trees. Every marriage was between cousins. First cousins, second cousins, but always within the family. And in the margins, someone had written notes about genetic traits, about which combinations produced the strongest children. "My God," I whispered, "you've been inbreeding for generations." "Keeping the bloodline pure," Uncle Ezra corrected, appearing in the doorway behind me. "And it's worked. Look how healthy we all are." But now that I was really looking, I could see it wasn't health. It was something else. The elongated proportions, the slightly too large heads, the way their eyes didn't quite track normally. How had I never noticed this as a kid? "Some of our children don't turn out as well as others," Aunt Martha admitted. "That's why we keep the weak ones downstairs, out of sight. But the strong ones, like your daddy, like you, they're perfect examples of what the Williams line can produce." Downstairs, Sarah tried to stand again, and this time I helped her. Whatever they'd given her was wearing off. "Jake, we need to leave. Now." "Nobody's leaving," Uncle Ezra said calmly. "Jake, you have a responsibility to this family. Your bloodline is strong. Sarah's bloodline is healthy. Together, you're going to help us strengthen the next generation. And if we refuse?" Uncle Ezra's smile disappeared. "Then you'll be kept here until Sarah produces children. However long that takes." I looked around the room at faces that had once seemed familiar and loving. Now they looked like strangers. Dangerous strangers. "You can't be serious." "Dead serious. Boy, your cousin Danny tried to leave a few years back. Brought some city girl up here, just like you did. When she refused to cooperate." He shrugged. "Well, let's just say Danny doesn't try to leave anymore." "Where is Danny?" "Basement of the old house. Him and his girl both. She's pregnant again, so we're hopeful this one will turn out better than the last 2. Sarah grabbed my arm. "Jake, we have to go, right now." But even as she said it, I could see men moving outside the windows. Cousin Tommy, Dale, Pete, they were surrounding the house. Uncle Ezra pulled out my car keys and dangled them in front of me. "Like I said, Jake, family doesn't leave." That night, they locked us in the cabin, not with chains or bars, but with family members sitting outside our door. "For your own protection," Aunt Martha had explained. "Until you get used to the idea." Sarah was fully alert now and terrified. "Jake, they drugged me. And that examination, they weren't just looking at my teeth. They measured my hips, my pelvis. They talked about optimal breeding age and fertility cycles." "I know. I'm sorry, I had no idea they were like this." "They're insane. They're talking about keeping us here as breeding stock." I wanted to tell her she was wrong, but I couldn't. Because somewhere in the back of my mind, I was remembering things from my childhood. Distant relatives I'd been told died young. Cousins who went away to live with other family. The basement of the old house that was always locked, always off limits. "We have to get out of here," I said. "How?" "They took your keys. They're watching us. And we're 20 miles from anywhere." That's when I remembered the old logging road. It ran along the ridge behind the compound, connected to the state highway about 10 miles east. If we could get to it without being seen. There's another way out, but we'll have to go through the woods, and we'll have to go tonight. We waited until after midnight. The guard outside our door, Cousin Pete, was snoring in his chair. We slipped out the back window and into the forest. The moon was bright enough to see by, but that also meant we could be seen if anyone was looking. We made it about a mile before we heard the dogs. "They're tracking us," Sarah whispered, grabbing my hand. We ran. Through the thick mountain woods, over fallen logs, around boulders, following what I hoped was the right direction. Behind us, the barking was getting closer. And there were lights now, flashlights bouncing through the trees. "Jake! Sarah! Come back now and we won't hurt you!" Uncle Ezra's voice echoed through the darkness. "You're just making this harder on yourselves." We kept running. My lungs were burning, and Sarah was stumbling. The dogs were definitely closer now. I could hear men's voices calling to each other, coordinating the search. That's when we saw the lights ahead of us. Not flashlights, headlights. The logging road. "There," I pointed. "If we can flag down a car." But as we got closer, I realized the lights weren't moving. It was a truck, parked right in the middle of the road, and standing beside it was Cousin Dale. "Evening, folks," he called out as we broke through the tree line. "Uncle Ezra thought you might come this way." We were trapped. Dogs behind us, Dale in front of us. Sarah was crying now, exhausted and terrified. I looked around desperately for another option. That's when I saw the ravine. It was steep, rocky, probably a 30-foot drop to the creek below. Dangerous as hell, but it was the only way that didn't lead back to the family compound. "Sarah, do you trust me?" She looked at me, then at Dale walking toward us with a rope in his hands, then at the lights moving through the trees behind us. "Yes." We jumped. The fall was Terry. Blee. I hit rocks, rolled, crashed through brush, and finally splashed into the creek at the bottom. Sarah landed a few yards away, moaning. We were both hurt, but we were alive. More importantly, we were away from them. Above us, I could hear Dale shouting, trying to find a way down. But the ravine was steep and treacherous. It would take them time to get to us. We followed the creek downstream, limping and supporting each other. My right arm was definitely broken, and Sarah had a deep cut on her forehead that was bleeding freely. But we kept moving. The creek would eventually meet up with the main river, and that led to civilization. It took us 6 hours to walk out of those mountains, 6 hours of stumbling through water, hiding from searchlights, and trying not to think about what would happen if they caught us. When we finally saw the lights of town, we both started crying. The police didn't believe our story, not entirely. When they went back to check on the Williams compound, they found it abandoned, empty, like no one had lived there for years. The only evidence that we'd been there was Sarah's purse, left behind in the cabin. Everything else was gone. We never found out what happened to Danny or to the others who might have been kept in that basement. The police searched, but they never found anything. It was like the entire extended Williams family had just vanished into the mountains. Sarah and I didn't get married. How could we? The experience had broken something between us, something trust-related that we couldn't fix. She transferred to a hospital in Colorado, and I changed my last name. I don't go by Williams anymore. I still have nightmares about it, about what they were planning to do to us, about the basement full of family members who didn't turn out right, about the careful charts tracking generations of genetic manipulation. But mostly, I have nightmares about the possibility that they're still out there somewhere, still looking for healthy blood to add to their line, still convinced that family is everything, and that a bloodline shouldn't mix with the outside world. I'm 35 now, and I've never had children, probably never will. Because sometimes, late at night, I wonder if maybe Uncle Ezra was right about one thing. Maybe some bloodlines really shouldn't continue. Maybe the world is better off if the Williams family name dies with me. I work as a traveling nurse, And back when I was 26, I was driving between assignments through the Tennessee mountains when my piece of junk Honda decided to die on me. This was 3 years ago, before I got smart and bought something reliable. I'd been working double shifts at a hospital in Knoxville and was headed to a clinic job in Georgia, taking the back roads because honestly, I needed the quiet. The mountain drives usually helped me decompress after dealing with difficult patients and crazy hospital politics. I remember thinking how peaceful everything looked that afternoon, all those rolling green hills and old farmhouses tucked into the valleys. My phone had lost signal about 20 miles back, which didn't worry me at the time. I figured I'd hit a town eventually. The car started making this awful grinding noise around 4 p.m., then just stopped. Steam was pouring out from under the hood, and I could smell something burning. I'm not mechanical at all, but even I knew this wasn't something I could fix with jumper cables. I was on this narrow mountain road with nothing but trees on both sides, no houses in sight. The sun was already getting low, and I knew I couldn't just sit there all night. So I grabbed my purse, locked up the car, and started walking. I walked for almost 2 hours before I saw smoke coming from a chimney through the trees. There was this little dirt driveway I almost missed, winding up through the forest to an old farmhouse. The place looked like something from the 1800s. White clapboard siding, big front porch, vegetable garden out front. There were a few other smaller cabins scattered around the property, connected by little walking paths. It felt like stepping back in time, but in a good way. Everything was so quiet and peaceful. This elderly woman answered the door when I knocked. She was probably in her 70s with gray hair and a neat bun and wearing a floral dress that looked homemade. "Oh my goodness, honey, you look worn out," she said before I could even explain what happened. Come in. I'm May Hawkins." She had this warm, grandmotherly voice that immediately put me at ease. I told her about my car breaking down, and she just started fussing over me like I was family. "Well, you can't walk back down that mountain in the dark," she said. "That's just dangerous. My husband Jebediah knows cars. He'll take a look first thing in the morning." May insisted on making me dinner while we waited for her husband to come back from wherever he was. The kitchen smelled incredible, like slow-cooked meat and herbs. She had this huge pot simmering on the stove that she kept stirring and adding things to. "We're having the whole family over tonight," she explained. "You're welcome to join us. We always cook way too much food." I tried to decline, saying I didn't want to impose, but she wouldn't hear it. "Nonsense," she said. "The mountain provides for everyone. That's how we've always done things up here." Around 6 p.m., people started arriving. First came Jebediah, May's husband, a tall, thin man with a gray beard who walked with a slight limp. Then more relatives showed up, coming from the other cabins on the property. There was May's brother Paul and his wife Sarah, their adult children with their own kids, May's elderly mother who lived in the back cabin. 12 people total, all crowding into the farmhouse dining room. They were incredibly welcoming, asking about my work as a nurse, where I was from, where I was headed. Normal family conversation. The kind of hospitality you hear about in the South but rarely experience as an outsider. The dinner was unlike anything I'd ever eaten. May had prepared 4 different meat dishes, some kind of roast, what looked like pork chops, sausages, and thas. Is stew that had been simmering all day. Everything was seasoned perfectly, but the flavors were unusual, rich and complex in a way I couldn't identify. "Family recipes," May explained, when I complimented the cooking. "Passed down for generations. We use special cuts of meat you can't get in regular stores." They kept piling food on my plate every time I finished something. "You're too thin," May kept saying. "A girl your age needs to eat." The whole family watched me eat with this intense attention that should have felt weird, but they were so kind about it that I just felt grateful. They shared stories about living in the mountains, about how their family had been on this land for over 100 years. "We do things the old way up here," Jebediah said. "Grow our own food, hunt our own meat, take care of our own people." After dinner, May showed me to a guest bedroom upstairs. It was simple but clean, with a handmade quilt and everything. "You get some rest, honey," she said. "Jebediah will look at your car in the morning, but he might need to order parts. Could take a few days." I was exhausted, so I didn't argue. The bed was comfortable, and I fell asleep listening to the family talking downstairs. I woke up the next morning to the smell of breakfast cooking. More meat, bacon, sausage, what May called mountain ham. Again, everything tasted incredible but slightly unfamiliar. The family treated me like I'd always lived there, including me in their conversations, asking my opinion on things. It felt nice after spending so much time alone on the road between jobs. Jebediah came back around noon and told me the bad news. "Your engine's shot," he said, wiping grease off his hands. "I can fix it, but I'll need to order a new water pump and probably some other parts. Might take 3 or 4 days to get everything up here." I was frustrated, but there wasn't much choice. May immediately insisted I stay with them. "We've got plenty of room, and we love the company," she said. That's when things started feeling off. Not dramatically wrong, just slightly uncomfortable in ways I couldn't put my finger on. Every single meal was meat-heavy: breakfast, lunch, dinner. When I asked about vegetables, May said they didn't agree with the family's digestion. "We've always been meat eaters," she explained. "It's just how we're built." The meat always tasted amazing, but I couldn't shake the feeling that the flavors were too rich, too complex, like nothing I'd ever had in restaurants or cooked myself. The family talked about food constantly, cooking techniques, the best ways to prepare different cuts, where they sourced their meat. Paul would go into detailed descriptions of hunting, how they tracked prey, the best methods for trapping, the importance of using every part of what you catch. "Nothing goes to waste up here," he'd say. "That's disrespectful to what gave its life for you." On the second day, I was using the bathroom when I noticed a stack of papers on the counter. Missing person flyers, hikers mostly, and some people who looked like travelers. All different ages, all last seen in various parts of the Tennessee mountains. I thought it was weird that May would collect these, but maybe she was just concerned about safety in the area. Mountain communities probably looked out for each other that way. That afternoon, I walked around the property a bit while the family was busy with chores. Behind one of the smaller cabins, I found this shed that wasn't locked. Inside were bones. Lots of bones. All cleaned and sorted. Leg bones in one pile, ribs in another, skulls on a shelf. My first thought was that they must hunt a lot of deer up here, but some of the bones looked wrong. Too big for deer, too shaped like human bones, if I'm being honest. But that was crazy thinking. I was probably just stressed from the car situation and spending too much time with strangers. May was sharpening knives when I came. Me back to the house. Big butcher knives, the kind you'd use for processing large game. She was running a whetstone along the blades with this focused concentration, testing the edges with her thumb. "Jebediah's bringing back fresh meat tomorrow," she said without looking up. "I like to make sure everything's ready." She had at least 6 different knives laid out on the kitchen table, all different sizes for different purposes. That night at dinner, May's elderly mother started talking about the family history, how they'd lived in these mountains since before Tennessee was even a state. "We maintain the old ways," she said in this creaky voice. "The mountain provides, but you have to know how to take what it offers. Some folks nowadays, they've gotten soft. They don't understand what it takes to survive up here." The whole family nodded along like this was important wisdom being passed down. "We can only eat certain kinds of meat," Paul added. "Regular store-bought stuff makes us sick. Has to be fresh, has to be prepared right. It's just how we're made." His wife Sarah chimed in. "My kids tried McDonald's once when they went to town. They were sick for days. Their bodies just can't handle processed food. I was starting to feel like they were fattening me up for something." Every meal, May would pile more food on my plate, watching to make sure I ate everything. "You're still too thin," she'd say. "A woman needs meat on her bones." The whole family would watch me eat with this intense attention. Not mean attention, but focused in a way that made me uncomfortable. On the third morning, Jebediah told me there were more problems with my car. "Turns out the transmission's going too," he said. "Might need another couple days." I was starting to feel trapped. Every time I mentioned maybe calling someone or trying to get to town, the family would find reasons why that was a bad idea. Too dangerous to walk the mountain roads. No cell service anyway. Everyone in town was busy with harvest time. That afternoon, I was looking for the bathroom when I opened what I thought was the right door. It was a closet, but not for clothes. It was a pantry with a big chest freezer. The freezer was full of meat, all wrapped in white butcher paper. But the packages were labeled in a way that made my blood go cold. Thigh, 815. Ribs, 820. Shoulder, 822. Human body parts, labeled with dates. Some of the dates were recent. I closed the freezer and backed out of that room as quietly as I could. My hands were shaking. I tried to tell myself there was some reasonable explanation, but deep down, I knew what I was seeing. This family. They weren't just mountain people living off the land. They were cannibals. I went back to my room and tried to think clearly. I was miles from the nearest town with no transportation and no way to call for help. The family had been nothing but kind to me, but now I understood why. I wasn't a guest. I was being prepared. That evening at dinner, the conversation was different, more coded. May asked how I was feeling, if I was getting enough rest, if I was ready for tomorrow. Paul mentioned something about harvest time and sharing the bounty with the community. Other family members kept glancing at me and smiling in ways that no longer felt warm. After dinner, May brought me a cup of tea. "This will help you sleep," she said. "Tomorrow's going to be a big day." The tea tasted bitter, herbal. Within 20 minutes, I was drowsy in a way that felt wrong. Drugged. I excused myself and went upstairs, pretending to drink more of the tea, but actually pouring it into a plant by the window. I lay in bed pretending to sleep, but staying alert. Around midnight, I heard the family talking downstairs. Voices I recognized, plus some new ones. People had arrived. I crept to the window and saw lights in all the cabins on the property. The whole community was gathering. I could hear May giving instructions about preparation, about the feast they were planning, about how long it had been since they'd had such good quality meat. They talked about me like I was livestock, which I guess is exactly what I was to them. I waited until the voices died down, then I got dressed and climbed out the bedroom window. There was a trellis on the side of the house that I could use to get down. My plan was to make it to my car and somehow get it started, even if it was damaged, or just start walking and hope I could make it to the main road before they noticed I was gone. But when I got to where I'd left my car, it wasn't there anymore. They'd moved it, or hidden it, or maybe driven it somewhere to dispose of it. I was completely stranded. I started running down the dirt driveway toward the main road. Behind me, I could hear dogs barking. Then voices. They'd discovered I was gone. Flashlights started moving through the trees. They were hunting me. I made it to the main road and just started running. I didn't know which direction led to town, but I figured either way was better than staying. I ran for what felt like hours until I saw headlights coming toward me. I flagged down the truck. It was a local man heading to his job at a sawmill. He took one look at me and knew something was wrong. I told him there were people trying to hurt me, that I needed to get to the police. He didn't ask questions, just drove me straight to the county sheriff's office. I tried to explain what had happened, but it sounded insane even to me. Cannibalistic mountain family? Human meat in the freezer? The deputy was polite but clearly skeptical. They sent someone to check on the property the next day. When they came back, they said the farmhouse was empty. No sign of anyone living there. No meat in any freezer. No bones in any shed. Like the whole family had just vanished overnight, taking everything with them. The deputy suggested that maybe I'd been more traumatized by the car breakdown than I realized. That being stranded and scared might have made me imagine things. Maybe the family was just eccentric mountain people with unusual customs, and I'd misinterpreted what I saw. But I know what I experienced. I know what I saw in that freezer. I know what those people were planning to do to me. I never went back for my car. I told the insurance company it was stolen, which wasn't exactly a lie. I bought a reliable vehicle as soon as I got home, and I've never taken back roads through remote mountains since then. I stick to highways now, well-traveled routes with plenty of gas stations and rest stops. Sometimes I wonder about other missing hikers and travelers in that area. I wonder if the Hawkins family is still out there, still maintaining their old ways in some other hidden hollow, still luring in stranded people with their warm hospitality and incredible cooking. I still work as a traveling nurse, but I'm a lot more careful about where I go and how I get there. And I've never been able to eat meat that tastes too rich or too perfectly seasoned. It brings back memories of those family dinners, when I was being fattened up like livestock, not knowing that I was the main course they were planning. Looking back, I think the scariest part wasn't the cannibalism itself. It was how normal they made it seem, how the whole community participated like it was just another family tradition, how they genuinely seemed to care about me right up until the moment they were ready to butcher me. I don't talk about this much. People think you're crazy when you tell stories like this, but I know there are places in these mountains where the old ways never died, where people do what they have to do to survive, regardless of what the outside world would think about it. I just hope I never accidentally stumble into another one of those places, because next time I might not be lucky enough to get away. Back when I was 32, I thought I had everything figured out. I was working on my doctoral thesis in geology at West Virginia University, and honestly, I was pretty confident about my research. My name's David Park, and I'd been mapping cave systems for about 10 years by then. I grew up in Pittsburgh, but I'd fallen in love with the limestone formations down in the mountains. The thing is, I was looking for something that would really make my dissertation stand out, something nobody had documented before. That's how I ended up at Devil's Throat Cave System, about 40 miles southeast of Charleston. A recent sinkhole had opened up some passages that hadn't been explored yet, and I figured this was my chance to make a real discovery. I should probably mention that I was working alone, which, looking back now, was probably stupid. But I didn't want word getting out about the location before I could document everything properly. Academic competition is pretty cutthroat, and I'd seen too many graduate students get their research scooped by professors or other students. So I packed up my GPS mapping equipment, geological sampling tools, photography gear, and enough emergency supplies for a 3-day solo expedition. I told my advisor I was doing fieldwork in the general area, but I kept the specific location to myself. The cave entrance was impressive, I'll give it that. The sinkhole had revealed what looked like a major limestone system with passages that seemed to go pretty deep. I'd done enough cave mapping to recognize good geology when I saw it, and this looked like textbook karst formation, perfect for what I needed. I set up my equipment at the entrance and started my descent around 9 a.m. on a Tuesday morning. The weather was clear, and I was feeling pretty good about the whole thing. The first 500 feet were exactly what I expected. Classic limestone formation, and some really interesting mineral deposits that would photograph well for my dissertation. I was finding stuff that could potentially be career-making, some rare crystal formations I hadn't seen documented in this part of West Virginia before. My GPS was working fine, my compass readings were consistent, and I was making good time with the mapping. If I'm being honest, I was feeling pretty pleased with myself. This was exactly the kind of original research that would set my work apart. That's when things started getting weird. It began with my compass. I'd been using the same instrument for years, and it had never given me problems before. But as I went deeper into the cave system, the readings started getting inconsistent. I'd take a bearing, walk what felt like a straight line for maybe 50 feet, then take another reading, and the compass would show I'd somehow changed direction by 90 degrees. At first, I figured there might be some iron ore deposits affecting the magnetic field, which isn't uncommon in these mountains. But when I checked my GPS, the readings were just as confusing. According to my GPS, I'd been walking for about 2 hours and covered maybe 3 miles of passage, but the distance readings showed I'd only moved about 200 yards from the entrance. That didn't make any sense. I stopped and recalibrated everything, thinking maybe the equipment was malfunctioning because of humidity or temperature changes. But the readings stayed weird. I'd walk for what felt like 20 minutes down a straight passage, and the GPS would show I'd moved maybe 10 feet. The cave geometry started bothering me, too. I'd been in hundreds of caves, and you develop a feel for how limestone formations work. But some of these passages seemed to meet at angles that didn't make sense. I'd find myself in chambers where the walls seemed to curve in ways that hurt my eyes to look at. Water was flowing upward in some places, pooling on the ceiling before dripping down. I saw rocks that appeared to be falling sideways, which should have been impossible. My watch and my backup chronometer started showing different times. One would say I'd been underground for 4 hours. The other would say 6 hours. And honestly, I couldn't tell which one was right. My internal sense of time was completely shot. The temperature was doing weird things too. My thermometer would read 55 degrees, but I'd feel hot and cold at the same time, like different parts of my body were experiencing different climates. Then my flashlight started acting up. The beam would bend around corners, illuminating areas I shouldn't have been able to see. I'd shine it down a passage, and the light would curve to the right and show me what was around a corner I hadn't reached yet. When I spoke, my voice would echo from behind me, even when I was talking toward the cave entrance. It was like sound was coming from directions that didn't exist. I touched the cave wall at one point, and it felt liquid even though it looked solid. My hand went right through what appeared to be solid limestone, like it was thick water. But when I pulled my hand back and looked at the wall, it looked completely normal. When I tried to touch it again, it was solid rock. By this point, I should have turned back. Any sensible person would have gotten out of there. But I kept thinking there had to be a scientific explanation. Maybe there were unusual mineral compositions affecting my equipment. Maybe the recent sinkhole had destabilized something and created unusual air currents or electromagnetic fields. I'm trained to find logical explanations for geological phenomena, so I kept going deeper, trying to document what I was seeing. That's when I started feeling like something was watching me. It wasn't a gradual thing. One moment I was alone in the cave, and the next moment I had this overwhelming sense that there was something else there with me, something huge and intelligent, paying attention, and to me from impossible directions, not from ahead or behind or above, but from directions that don't have names. I kept turning around, shining my flashlight into passages I'd already mapped, but there was never anything there. Then I started seeing shapes that made my brain hurt. I can't really describe them because human language doesn't have words for geometries like that. Imagine trying to describe a cube to someone who's only ever seen two-dimensional shapes, and you'll get an idea of how impossible it was. These weren't just weird rock formations. They were shapes that seemed to exist in more dimensions than should be possible. Looking at them gave me a headache and made my eyes water. I started getting thoughts that weren't mine. Concepts in languages that I don't think were ever spoken by humans. Mathematical ideas that made perfect sense for about 2 seconds before my brain rejected them completely. It was like something vast and alien was examining my consciousness, poking around in my thoughts to see how human minds work. Time stopped making sense. I was experiencing my childhood and my future simultaneously. I watched myself as a kid playing in my backyard in Pittsburgh while also seeing myself as an old man I'd never been. Past, present, and future were all happening at once, and linear time became completely meaningless. The cave started showing me other realities. I'd look through what seemed like windows in the rock and see the same cave system but with different formations, different passages, sometimes filled with water or ice or things that might have been living tissue. Multiple versions of reality were occupying the same space, bleeding through from universes where physics worked differently. My sanity started coming apart systematically. I forgot how to speak English. I forgot my own name, my purpose for being there, what species I was. Human concepts started draining out of my mind like water through a sieve. I understood with horrible clarity how completely insignificant humanity is in the vast cosmic scope of the universe. We're less than bacteria to things that exist on scales we can't even imagine. I lost track of my body. I was existing in all directions at once, up and down, becoming meaningless concepts. I wasn't David Park anymore. I was something else. Something that had always existed in spaces between spaces, watching civilizations rise and fall like brief flickers of light. And then somehow, I was back at the cave entrance. I don't remember the ascent. I don't remember how I got my equipment out or how long I was down there. The search team found me sitting at the cave mouth 3 days after I was supposed to return, completely unresponsive. They said I was staring straight ahead, not blinking, not reacting to voices or touch. The doctors at Charleston General couldn't figure out what was wrong with me. My brain scans showed activity they'd never seen before, neural patterns that shouldn't exist in human consciousness. When I finally started talking again, I could only communicate in mathematical equations and cosmic terms that described reality in ways that made the psychiatrists uncomfortable. They transferred me to a specialized facility, but honestly, there's no treatment for seeing too much of the truth about what exists beyond human perception. I spent 2 years drawing geometric diagrams that hurt people's eyes to look at, trying to communicate knowledge that human brains aren't equipped to process. My research notes were destroyed. The university claimed my equipment had malfunctioned beyond repair, but I think they understood that some knowledge is too dangerous to preserve. They sealed Devil's Throat Cave, officially citing structural instability, but I know the real reason. Other researchers started having similar experiences. 3 graduate students and a professor from the geology department had what they called episodes over the following year. The university quietly shut down the cave mapping program after that. I'm 38 now, and I can mostly function in normal society again, but I still draw those diagrams sometimes, when the dreams get too intense. I never went back to geology. I work at a hardware store in Morgantown now, selling ordinary tools to ordinary people who don't know how fragile their reality really is. The thing is, I know it's still down there. Whatever exists in that cave system, it doesn't care about humans at all. We're not even worthy of its attention. It just is, existing in dimensions we can't perceive, completely indifferent to our existence. Sometimes I wake up at night with the absolute certainty that it's expanding, that its influence is spreading through the underground systems beneath West Virginia. But there's nothing I can do about that knowledge, and honestly, I'm not sure there's anything anyone should do about it. Some things are better left buried in the darkness where they belong. Back when I was 29, I was scraping by doing landscaping work around Louisville. Nothing steady, just whoever would hire me for odd jobs. I'd been out of work for about 3 weeks when this guy approached me at a gas station near the interstate. Said he needed someone to clear hiking trails up in the mountains near Copper Ridge, Kentucky. Cash job, no questions asked about permits or paperwork. $150 a day for 5 days of work. I wasn't in a position to be picky. The guy was pretty vague about the details, but the money was real enough. He showed me a roll of 20s and said he'd drive me up there himself, drop me off with all the equipment I'd need. Chainsaw, brush cutter, machete, camping gear, enough food for 5 days. All I had to do was clear about 15 miles of overgrown hiking paths that hadn't been maintained in years. He'd pick me up at the same spot exactly 5 days later. No radio contact, no cell service up there anyway. Just me and the work. Looking back now, I should have asked more questions. But I needed the money, and honestly, the idea of being alone in the mountains for a week sounded pretty good after months of dealing with people who couldn't pay what they owed me. The drive up took about 3 hours, winding through some beautiful country I'd never seen before. We passed through a couple of small towns that looked like they'd seen better days, then kept climbing until we were on these narrow mountain roads that probably hadn't been paved in 20 years. Finally, he pulled over at what looked like an old logging road that disappeared into thick forest. "Trail starts about a quarter mile in," he said, helping me unload the gear. "Just follow the orange markers. They're faded, but you'll see them if you look close." He handed me a hand-drawn map that looked like someone had sketched it on the back of a napkin. 5 days. I'll be right here at noon on Friday." And then he was gone, leaving me standing there with more equipment than I could carry in one trip, looking at a forest that seemed to swallow sound. I made 3 trips hauling everything to where the actual trail began, or what was left of it. You could barely tell it had ever been a trail. Just a slight depression through the trees, choked with fallen branches and overgrown with the kind of thick brush that takes years to establish. The first day went exactly like I expected. Beautiful mountain scenery, clean air, and work that was hard but satisfying. I made good progress with the chainsaw, cutting through fallen trees and clearing the worst of the overgrowth. By evening, I'd probably cleared close to 2 miles. At this rate, I'd have the whole job done early and still get paid for 5 days. I set up camp near a clear stream about 50 yards off the trail. The water was ice cold and tasted better than anything that comes out of a tap in the city. I cooked dinner on a little camp stove, watched the sun set through the trees, and felt better about my life than I had in months. Sometimes you don't realize how much noise you live with until it's gone. Up there, all you could hear were normal forest sounds. Owls calling to each other, crickets, wind moving through the trees. It was perfect. I slept better that first night than I had in weeks. The second morning started normal enough. Coffee and breakfast, checking the chainsaw fuel, getting ready for another day of cutting. The weather was perfect. Maybe 65 degrees with just enough breeze to keep the bugs away. I was actually whistling while I worked, thinking about how I might ask the guy if he had more jobs like this one. But by noon, something had changed. I didn't notice it at first, just a feeling that something was different. It took me maybe an hour to realize what it was. The forest had gone completely quiet. No birds, no insects, no small animals rustling in the underbrush. Even the wind seemed to have stopped. Just dead silence except for the sound of my own breathing and the chainsaw when I was using it. I told myself it was probably normal. Maybe there was weather coming in or some natural cycle I didn't know about. Animals probably knew things that humans missed. But the quiet was so complete, it started to feel heavy, like the air itself was pressing down on me. That's when I started noticing I was being watched. It's hard to explain if you've never felt it. Not something you see or hear, just this absolute certainty that eyes are on you. I'd catch movement in my peripheral vision, but when I'd turn to look, nothing there. Just trees and shadows. I started working faster, wanting to get as much done as possible while I could still concentrate. Around 3 in the afternoon, I found the first tracks. They were in a muddy spot near the stream where I'd been getting water. Massive prints, bigger than any bear track I'd ever seen. 4 toes, with what looked like claw marks extending 6 inches beyond each toe. But the shape was wrong for a bear. Too narrow, too long. And there was something about the spacing that made me think of hands more than paws. I knelt down next to the clearest print and put my hand next to it for comparison. My whole hand would have fit in just the palm area. Whatever made these tracks was huge. I followed the trail of prints for maybe 100 yards before they disappeared on rocky ground. But I found other signs. Trees with bark stripped off in perfect spirals, starting about 4 feet off the ground and going up 8 feet or more. Claw marks gouged deep into the wood, too high and too large to be from any animal I knew about. There was a smell, too. Musky, like wet fur, but underneath that, something that reminded me of spoiled meat. The smell got stronger as I followed the trail deeper into the woods, until I couldn't ignore what my gut was telling me. This wasn't curiosity anymore. This was as stupid. I turned back toward camp, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was following me. Not just watching now, but actually moving through the forest parallel to my path. I'd hear a branch snap off to my left, then a few minutes later the same sound off to my right. Like something was pacing me, staying just out of sight. When I got back to where I'd been working, I found my chainsaw had been moved. Not far, maybe 10 feet from where I'd left it. But I remembered exactly where I'd set it down, and it definitely wasn't there anymore. The fuel line had been cut, not torn or broken, but cut clean through with something sharp. My other tools were arranged in a neat line next to the trail. Machete, handsaw, brush cutter, all lined up like someone had been examining them, figuring out what they were for. That night, I barely slept at all. I kept hearing footsteps circling my tent. Slow, heavy steps that didn't match any pattern I recognized. Sometimes they'd stop right outside where my head was, and I'd hear breathing. Deep, slow breathing that went on for minutes at a time. Once I heard what sounded like sniffing, like something was trying to identify my scent through the tent fabric. I had a flashlight, but something told me not to use it. Some instinct that said whatever was out there was curious right now, but light might change that to something else. When morning finally came, I found handprints in the dirt all around my tent. Not human hands. 4 thick fingers and what looked like an opposable thumb, but each finger was twice as long as mine and ended in a claw. The palm prints were the size of dinner plates. That's when I saw it for the first time. I was packing up my camp, trying to decide whether to keep working or just hike back to the pickup point and wait, when movement caught my eye about 100 yards up the slope. Something big and black, was moving between the trees. At first I thought it was a bear walking on its hind legs, but the proportions were all wrong. Too tall, maybe 8 feet, arms that hung down almost to its knees. And it was watching me. For maybe 30 seconds, we just looked at each other. Then it stepped sideways behind a tree and disappeared, but I could feel it still watching. I decided to keep working, but staying close to the main trail where I could get out fast if I needed to. That turned out to be a mistake. The thing was smart, smarter than any animal had a right to be. It started by throwing rocks, not at me, but near me. A baseball-sized stone would come crashing through the branches and hit the ground 10 feet away. Then another one from a different direction, like it was testing my reactions, learning how I moved. Then it started setting traps. Simple ones, but effective. Branches arranged to trip me if I walked a certain path. Loose rocks balanced on logs that would fall if I brushed against them. Nothing that would really hurt me, just things that would slow me down or make me change direction. It was hurting me, pushing me away from the main trail and deeper into its territory. By the third day, it was getting bolder. I'd see it during daylight, sometimes quite close. It looked like someone had taken a human and stretched it in all the wrong directions, then covered it with coarse black fur. The face was the worst part, almost human. But the features were too sharp, the mouth too wide, and the eyes were red. Not just reflecting light red, but actually red, like there was fire behind them. It started mimicking sounds. First just my movements, like it was learning how humans walked. Then my voice. I'd hear someone calling my name from different directions, but it was my own voice calling. That was when I realized this wasn't just some territorial animal. This thing was studying me, learning from me, and it was intelligent enough to use what it learned. On the fourth night, it stopped pretending we were just sharing the same space. I'd given up on the 10, and was sleeping in a run-down hunting cabin I'd found about a mile off the main trail. It had solid walls and a door I could bar from the inside. I thought I was safe. Around midnight, I heard it on the roof, not just walking around, but systematically testing different spots, looking for weak points. It found one above the corner where I was huddled with my back against the wall. I heard claws scraping through old shingles, then pieces of wood raining down inside the cabin. It could have gotten in any time it wanted. But it was playing with me, letting me know it could reach me anywhere, that there was no such thing as safe. That's when I made the decision to run. I waited until just before dawn, when the sounds on the roof stopped. Then I grabbed my backpack and headed for the pickup point as fast as I could move through the forest. I had almost a full day before the truck was supposed to come, but I didn't care. I'd rather wait in the open than spend another night with that thing circling me. But it wasn't going to let me leave. I made it maybe 2 miles before I realized it was hurting me again. Every time I'd try to head toward the logging road, I'd find my path blocked. A fallen tree that hadn't been there the day before. Thick brush that I swear had grown overnight. And always, just at the edge of my vision, that black shape pacing me through the trees. It was driving me toward a cliff face I hadn't even known was there. The ground started rising sharply, and suddenly I was looking at a sheer drop of maybe 300 feet. No way down, no way around. Behind me, I could hear it crashing through the underbrush, not bothering to stay hidden anymore. When it stepped out of the tree line, I finally got a good look at what had been hunting me for 4 days. It walked upright like a man, but everything else was wrong. The arms were too long, hanging down past it. Knees, ending in hands that were more like claws. The legs were backward jointed, like a dog's hind legs, but thick with muscle. Its head was human-shaped, but stretched vertically, with a beaked jaw that unhinged like a snake's. And those red eyes looked right through me, like I was already dead. It didn't rush, just walked toward me slowly, taking its time. It had me exactly where it wanted me, and it knew it. I don't remember making the decision to jump. 1 second I was backing away from it, the next I was falling through empty air toward the rocks below. I should have died. Would have, if I hadn't hit a ledge about 40 feet down instead of going all the way to the bottom. Broke 3 ribs and my left wrist. but I was alive. And more importantly, I could hear that thing above me, pacing back and forth at the edge of the cliff, making sounds I can't even describe. It took me 6 hours to climb down the rest of the way with one good hand. By the time I made it to the logging road, the pickup truck was already there. The driver took one look at me and didn't ask any questions, just helped me into the passenger seat and drove straight to the hospital. I told the doctors I fell while hiking. Told the police the same thing when they asked about the job I was supposed to be doing. As far as anyone official knows, I spent 5 days clearing trails and had an accident on the last day. But I know what really happened up there, and I know that thing is still in those mountains, still hunting. The trail clearing job never got finished. Sometimes I look up missing hiker reports for that area, and there are more than there should be. People who go into those mountains and just disappear without a trace. I moved to Florida 6 months later. Flatland, beaches, plenty of people around all the time. I don't camp anymore, don't hike, don't even like being in the woods during the day, and I still wake up sometimes thinking I can hear something breathing outside my window. Even though I live on the 3rd floor of an apartment building in the middle of Tampa, sometimes at night, I'll catch myself listening for footsteps circling the building. Some things you never really escape. You just put distance between you and them and hope it's enough. I was 28 when I took a job documenting oral histories for the Appalachian Studies program at East Tennessee State University. It wasn't glamorous work, but it paid decent, and I got to travel around the mountains interviewing elderly folks about their family stories and traditions. Most of it was pretty routine stuff. Old mining tales, family feuds, ghost stories that had been passed down for generations. I'd grown up in Knoxville, so the mountain culture wasn't completely foreign to me, but I was still learning a lot. The assignment that changed everything came in late October 2019. My supervisor handed me a folder with contact information for several families in the Copper Ridge area of Wise County, Virginia. Apparently, some researcher back in the 70s had started a project documenting the mixed heritage families in that region, folks with Portuguese, Native American, and African ancestry who'd been living in those mountains for generations. The project had been abandoned for some reason, and now they wanted me to finish it. Just basic oral history stuff, Dr. Patterson told me. Family stories, cultural traditions, maybe some of the old songs if they're willing to share them. Nothing too complicated. I loaded up my Honda with recording equipment and drove up there on a Tuesday morning. Copper Ridge isn't much more than a handful of houses scattered along a winding mountain road with a few old tobacco barns and a cemetery that looked like it hadn't seen a new burial in decades. Pretty typical for that part of Appalachia, isolated, quiet, the kind of place where everybody knows everybody and strangers get noticed. My first interview was with an elderly woman named Mary Goins. She lived alone in a little white house with a porch that was slowly separating from the main structure. When I knocked and introduced myself, explaining about the university project, she got this strange look on her face. "You said you're here about the old families?" she asked, looking past me toward my car like she was checking to see if anyone else was with me. "That's right, ma'am. Just collecting family stories and traditions for the archives." She was quiet for a long moment, then stepped aside to let me in. "I suppose it's time somebody heard them then. Been keeping these stories to myself for too long." Her house was small but neat, filled with old photographs and what looked like handmade quilts. She served me sweet tea and we sat at her kitchen table while I set up my recording equipment. At first, the interview went normally. She talked about her grandparents, about how the families in Copper Ridge had always kept to themselves, about the challenges of maintaining their culture when the outside world didn't always understand or accept them. But then, she started talking about something that happened in 1973. "There was a young woman came up here that year," Mary said, her voice getting quieter. "Said she was from some university, doing research just like you, real pretty girl, friendly as could be. Asked all the right questions, showed genuine interest in our ways. We all took a liking to her." Mary paused, staring out the window toward the mountains. "Her name was Rebecca something. She stayed up here for about 3 months, living in a little cabin the Mullins family let her use. She interviewed everybody, recorded our songs, even learned some of our traditional crafts. We thought she really understood us, you know. thought she was going to help tell our story to the world. What happened to her? I asked. That's just it. We don't rightly know. One morning the Mullins boys went to check on her and found the cabin empty. All her research materials were gone, but her personal belongings were still there. Her car was still parked outside. It was like she just vanished. Mary leaned forward, lowering her voice even more. But here's the strange part. After she disappeared, people started hearing her voice in the woods. Always at night, always calling out like she was lost. Some folks said they saw her walking the old logging roads, but when they'd go to help her, she'd just fade away into the trees. I figured this was just mountain folklore, the kind of ghost story that develops when someone disappears under mysterious circumstances. But Mary insisted it was different. It wasn't no regular ghost story, she said. The voice. It knew things, personal things about our families, secrets that Rebecca couldn't have known even with all her interviewing. And it wasn't just calling for help. It was trying to get people to follow it, deeper into the mountains where the old mine shafts are. She told me that several people had followed the voice over the years, always at night, always alone. Most came back confused and disoriented, with no memory of where they'd been or how long they'd been gone. But 3 people, 2 adults and a teenager, never came back at all. The sheriff looked into it, of course, but what could he find? Folks go missing in these mountains all the time. Could be bears, could be mine shafts, could be they just got lost and died of exposure. But we knew it was connected to that voice. After about 2 hours, Mary walked me to the door and gave me directions to a few other houses where I might find people willing to talk. But as I was getting into my car, she grabbed my arm. "You be careful up here, especially after dark," she said. "And if you hear a woman calling for help in the woods, don't you follow that voice. Nothing good ever came from following voices in these mountains." I spent the rest of that week interviewing other families in the area. The Mullins, the Gibson, the Castells. All of them had stories about their ancestors and traditions, but they also all mentioned Rebecca. Every single person I talked to remembered her, and they all had the same story about her disappearance and the voice that had been heard in the woods ever since. What made it unsettling was how consistent the details were. Everyone described the same voice, the same locations where it was heard, the same behavior of trying to lure people into the deeper woods. These weren't variations on a theme. They were identical accounts from people who claimed they didn't talk about it much, even among themselves. On Friday evening, I was staying in a little motel in the town of Wise, about 20 minutes down the mountain from Copper Ridge. I was transcribing my interviews when I realized I'd left one of my recording devices at the Mullins house. Mrs. Mullins had been showing me some old photographs during our interview, and I'd set the recorder down on her coffee table and forgotten to pick it up. I knew I should wait until morning, but I had another appointment early Saturday, and I didn't want to lose a day of work. The recorder had several hours of interviews on it that I hadn't backed up yet, so around 9 o'clock I drove back up to Copper Ridge. The Mullins house sat at the end of a dirt road surrounded by thick woods on 3 sides. When I pulled up, I could see lights on inside, so I knocked on the door. Mrs. Mullins answered and was happy to retrieve my recorder for me. We chatted for a few minutes on her porch, and then I headed back to my car. That's when I heard it. "Help me, please, somebody help me." The voice was coming from the woods to my left, maybe 50 yards into the trees. It sounded like a young woman, scared and desperate. My first instinct was to call out, to ask where she was and if she was hurt. Then I remembered what Mary Goins had told me. I stood beside my car for a moment, listening. The voice came again, a little fainter, like whoever it was had moved deeper into the woods. "I'm lost. I can't find my way back. Please help me." It sounded so genuine, so frightened. If I hadn't spent the week hearing stories about Rebecca's voice, I would have grabbed a flashlight and gone looking for whoever was out there. Instead, I got in my car as quickly as I could and started driving down the mountain. But as I drove, the voice seemed to follow me. I could hear it through my closed windows, sometimes from the left side of the road, sometimes from the right, always pleading for help. It stayed with me for about 2 miles until I reached the main highway. The next morning, I called Mrs. Mullins to ask if anyone in the area had reported a missing person. She said no. and when I described what I'd heard, she got very quiet. "That was her," she said finally. "That was Rebecca's voice. You did right not to follow it." I finished my interviews that weekend and headed back to Johnson City, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was very wrong about the whole situation. The voice I'd heard wasn't some distant echo or unclear sound. It had been crystal clear, close enough that I should have been able to see whoever was making it. And it had definitely moved through the woods in a way that seemed to track my car. When I got back to the university, I decided to do some research on the previous project from 1973. It took some digging through old files, but I eventually found records of a graduate student named Rebecca Chen who had been working on a thesis about mixed heritage communities in Appalachia. According to her advisor's notes, she had gone to Copper Ridge in July 1973 and was expected to return by September. She never did. There was a missing person report, but the investigation didn't turn up much. Her car was found abandoned at the cabin where she'd been staying, with no signs of violence or struggle. The assumption was that she'd gotten lost hiking and died of exposure, but her body was never recovered. What struck me was that Rebecca had been doing almost exactly the same research I was doing, documenting the same families, asking the same questions, using the same methodology. The parallels were unsettling. I submitted my interviews and finished the project, but I made a point of not going back to Copper Ridge. Several months later, I heard from Dr. Patterson that the university had decided to suspend any further research in that area. Apparently, I wasn't the first person to report strange experiences up there. Looking back now, I think about what might have happened to Rebecca Chen. Did she follow a voice into those woods? Was someone or something using her voice to lure others into the same trap? Or was there something else going on entirely? I still work in oral history, but I've learned to be more careful about isolated mountain communities. There are places where the past doesn't stay buried, where old tragedies leave echoes that can be dangerous for the unwary. Copper Ridge is one of those places. To this day, I wonder if Rebecca is still out there somewhere, lost in those mountains, calling for help that never comes. Or if something else learned to use her voice and is still using it to hunt for new victims. Either way, I'm never going back to find out. Some questions are better left unanswered, especially in the deep mountains where the old rules still apply, and not everything that calls for help should be trusted. I heard just last year that another researcher went missing in that area, a documentary filmmaker who was working on a project about vanishing Appalachian communities. His equipment was found by a hiking trail about 5 miles from Copper Ridge, but he was never seen again. The locals say they've been hearing 2 voices in the woods now, a woman and a man, both calling for help, both trying to lead people deeper into the mountains where the old mines wait in the darkness. I don't know if that's true, but I do know I won't be the one to find out. Some stories are meant to stay in the mountains, and some voices are meant to go unheard.